solution is kind of simple, right?
Yes, I know. That's what's really
Right?
great. It's just
Right? We got to
my
clean.
recommendation for good health is just clean living,
Yes, yes.
stay away from poison. So fresh air, live in a place that doesn't have a lot of toxic chemicals in the air, eat organic food, get out in the sunlight, walk the beach. I mean, just,
Mm.
get exercise, basic healthy living. I think if you just have a healthy lifestyle, a lot of your disease problems will go away. Great job. I really appreciate.
Oh,
I talked
thank you,
about
Loretta.
things today that I haven't talked about before
Oh,
because this is my new
fantastic.
research. Yeah, brand new. So,
Over time, I'll be trying to tap into some of your work to again justifying the good foods and also being stricter against, the things that are not so good. We got to get cleaner, more natural stuff. Stay away
yes,
from the GMOs. Stay away
I
from the
really
glyphosate.
appreciate you looking at the supplements because we really need awareness of which ones are good and which ones aren't.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure to do so. And thank you for all the work
This
you're
was
doing.
great.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll be reaching out to you again, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Please do.
And
Yeah, I'd love to do
you
another
know,
interview. We obviously have a lot in common and we have a lot to say. So
Happy New Year.
happy New Year to you.
Thank you.
Great New Year. We're hopeful.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I'm very excited. And I'm very excited to be able to kick off the new year with you. So thank you very much, Stephanie.
My pleasure.
Just real quick, well, I'll be publishing this after you review it, of course. Um, but just to let people know, I had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Stephanie Seneff late last year. I can say that now. Today's January 1st. And it was really unexpected. We touched upon so many things. It was so much fun. Unfortunately, we didn't get to record it. Yeah, let me introduce you. So today I'm speaking with Dr. Stephanie Seneff, a senior research scientist from MIT. And tell us just a little bit about you before we start going into a deep dive on things.
Okay, my career is kind of interesting. I started off at MIT undergraduate and stayed there forever. I never left MIT. So
Wow.
I got 4 degrees, bachelor's in biology, and then master's EE and PhD degrees in electrical engineering and computer science.
Mm.
And then I got on staff and I worked my way up to the top of the line on research, on the research track. So senior research scientist. It's equivalent to the full professor on the professor track, but I'm not a professor. So I have to correct people when they say that. MIT likes to
Gotcha.
distinguish its research staff as not being qualified to be called professors, which is interesting, but
Gotcha.
that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, so I did most of my career was in developing. I wrote a lot of computer code to develop systems that could allow computers to communicate with humans using natural language. That was most of my career, and it wasn't until like 2007 timeframe. I was watching autism rates go up, and I was concerned,
Mm.
and and I didn't see the government being concerned, and that concerned me more. So it was like
Yes.
somebody's got to look at this. Oh, we're
Right.
just diagnosing it more. They're still saying that to this day, which really annoys me because it's 1 in 36 now.
It's
And it was like one
insane.
in 10,000 when I was a child. And it's just insane. You can't be just diagnosing it more to 1 in 36. You just can't.
Right, right. Yeah,
Right.
it really
So
is absurd. It's impossible to believe these numbers, but of course it's right in front of us.
I know. And people
And
with kids with autism now these days, you pretty much know somebody, at least one, usually. I think if you know anybody, if you have a crowd, one of them's going to have autism.
right.
It's really frightening. And it keeps getting worse every year. And they're nonchalant about it. So yeah, anyway, I thought it was such a big crisis that I needed to do something. And I completely switched my career over to studying the correlations between toxic exposures and disease, starting with autism. And it's been a
Yeah.
very fruitful enterprise. I've loved it, actually. I love biology is my first love. I always really wanted to be a biologist, but I kind of flunked the biology lab. I actually spent a year in the PhD program in biology at MIT, and I was and I found that I really couldn't do and hated lab work. So that was kind of a
Wow.
huge problem. I'm like, oh my God, I've trained all my life for this career that I can't do. I was really miserable. So I basically dropped out and then started again with the electrical engineering. I was better with the computer path because computers are very straightforward. You just write some code. It's really lovely that you have control of the
Right, right.
situation. So that's kind of an interesting background. But I've always loved biology. I've always continued to keep up on it and read the literature throughout my life. And so it was a great opportunity to kind of get back into biology in 2007. And I did it in a big, big way. I mean, I was like so thrilled because I started reading all the papers on autism. I was concerned about the vaccines. I still am. At first, I thought the vaccines are probably a major factor, and I still think that's true. But I
Yeah, I
felt
would
there was
agree.
something else, something else. And that's when it took me 5 years of looking, and I knew a lot about autism by that point. And then I just happened to be at a lecture. Well, I was at a conference where Professor Don Huber was speaking for 2 hours on glyphosate. And at that time, this is 2012, I didn't know what glyphosate was.
Mm.
Embarrassingly now, now I can't believe anybody doesn't know what glyphosate is,
I
but
think
I
everyone
walked
does
in,
know now, right?
it's gotten out. Yeah, I used to ask when I'd give a lecture, how many of you know what glyphosate is, and you'd get hands raised, and it got to be more and more over time. So that was very pleasing. But yeah, we've gotten that message out. Glyphosate is toxic. It's the most
Mm.
common herbicide on the planet. Brazil and the US are probably number one, number two. I'm not sure who's one. And the use of glyphosate on core crops, really the big guns on glyphosate usage. And we have consistently said it's safe, don't worry about it, it's wonderful, a great tool to make food cheap. What's not to like
Right.
about that? That's been the US government's message forever. And they
Right.
will not listen to the people who, the papers are coming out left and right these days. It's really amazing. I'm very gratified to see that. I can't even keep
Yeah.
up with the glyphosate literature anymore.
It's wonderful and horrific at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. But the
Right.
message is
So,
getting out. And I've got some friends who are real fighters. And Honeycutt, I really want to give a shout out for her, Michelle Perro. The three of us are collaborating on we do a monthly episode of a, you know, event in which we record ourselves conversing on various topics related to children's health and disease, is pretty
oh,
focused, and toxic exposures. So, but Zen is the founder of Moms Across America, and she and I met in Beijing many, many years ago, actually shortly after, maybe 2014, and we've been friends ever since. And she's a real fighter. She's a mother, and she has three sons who are now practically grown. They're probably around 20, and her kids had a lot of health problems, and she couldn't figure out what it was. And then she finally identified the food. She put them on an organic diet, and
oh,
all their problems basically went away. And so she was sold on that. And she's a mother. She's a passionate mother. So we have this new MDs, moms, doctors, and scientists. We have a mom, a doctor, and a scientist, because Michelle
very
is a
nice.
pediatrician for this thing that we do, this show. Yeah.
Oh, very nice. I'll have to check that out. I'm surprised I haven't come across it before.
Yeah.
'Cause of course, I've come across you before through the Western Price Foundation, but we never actually crossed paths and spoke prior.
It's too
Even
bad. A missed opportunity, right?
yeah, it's just but everything happens at the right time, and it
Yeah.
is kind of funny because we're both involved with the Western Price Foundation, but then it was. I was speaking with Dr. Judy Mikovits about MSM and its role
Yes.
in methylation and glutathione. And she said,
Yes.
"Oh, you should speak to Dr. Seneff."
Yes.
And so I reached out to you, and then you got back to me actually noticing, well, wow, we had a lot of similarities in our background with the computer science and the
I know.
natural
It's amazing.
sciences. Yeah, quite interesting. And so I can relate. So as you were speaking, I was thinking, I'll bet your work in the computer science field um, probably helped. It made biology easier for you when you went back to it,
I think so. I
right?
actually think a
Right?
computer scientist is trained to think differently from a biologist. I really do.
Right.
And when I study biology, every time I see something going on, and the articles are wonderful, and they'll say, "Well, this happened and that happened," and they never sort of step back and say, "Well, why did the body do that? Why did it respond that way? What's going on here?" They don't seem to
Right.
care about why. They just report, "Here's what we saw." Maybe they're trained, I don't know, trained not to think about, what's the reason. I often sort of humanize the cells. I get in trouble with that because I
Oh,
kind of think of them as little, living objects, living organisms, the cells themselves, as sort of trying to figure out their world and dealing with all the toxic exposures they're getting and how are they
hmm.
coping with it. I animate them, in my
It's a
mind.
great perspective.
And then I get in trouble when I write that way. My co-authors criticize me and say, "No, you can't say that they actually intended to do that. It's just like it just happens." So I'm
That's
trying to
very
get
funny. Yeah.
untrained to think
Yeah.
that way. But I think it's actually helped me to figure things out, because I always think that biology does everything for a reason. This is a basic principle that I have.
Hmm.
And even like something like high blood pressure, where they say, "Oh, your blood pressure's high, you need to take a pill." I'm
Oh,
skeptical of that.
Right, right. Yeah,
because your
that
body's
kills
putting
me.
your blood pressure at the place it needs to be to do whatever job it needs to do. And maybe it's because you've got all these poisons that you have to raise it in order to get the blood to
Yes.
circulate. But you better do that because you're going to wipe out your brain if you don't get enough oxygen to it. So I'm very skeptical of the blood pressure pills. For example, in fact, most of the pharmaceuticals I'm skeptical of.
I'm the same.
Basically, they're toxic, they're toxic chemicals that are attacking some protein typically. They suppress some
Right.
critical
Right.
enzyme and say, you can't go, you can't do what you want to do. And somebody else has got to
Right.
take the load now because you're not going to work. And
Yeah,
that doesn't
right.
make sense
Right.
to me. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think they're also a source possibly for one of the things, of course, I want to get in with you today, kind of burying the lead here because I want to end up leading to deuterium.
Yes.
Right? So we know there are all of these. A lot of people don't know that word, what it means, et cetera. So we'll get into that. And you're doing some really cool research on that. And one of the funny things was when we were first talking last time, we stumbled across all this common ground.
Yes.
And then you mentioned, well, there's one thing you might not be familiar with, and you mentioned the deuterium, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have a bunch of videos on that.
You are
Um,
familiar with it. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that's
yes.
wonderful. That's rare.
Yeah.
Most people are like, what's that? They
Yeah,
don't know what it
right,
is.
right. So I'm trying to educate people, I'm trying to
Yeah.
bridge that gap. And that's one of the hidden toxins within the toxins, so to say, right? So
Yeah, it's actually kind of like a mineral, I think. I think of it as like a mineral in some ways. It's not a
okay.
mineral.
Right,
Well, what
right,
we should tell them what it is, the audience. It's heavy hydrogen. So
right.
a deuterium is a hydrogen atom with an extra neutron. It has a proton and a neutron, which makes it twice as heavy. It's like
Mm,
carbon 14. So carbon 14, carbon 12 is the normal one. There's other versions of carbon, and carbon 14
right.
is used in chemistry to track things. So it's called 2H. One H is hydrogen, 2H, because of having two things in the nucleus, is deuterium, twice as heavy. And hydrogen
Mhm.
is by far the most common atom in the universe. Deuterium is rare. It's a
Yes,
rare isotope of
right,
hydrogen, but it's not rare in practice because hydrogen is so common. So
right,
compared to hydrogen, it's rare, but compared to
right.
calcium, it's 5 times as much deuterium in the blood as calcium.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing when you think about it. Actually, like one of my videos is also to point out that hydrogen is also the most common element in the human body. People think,
Absolutely.
right? People think, oh, we're carbon based, or right?
I
They don't
know. It's by
realize,
far the most common. I think the
yes, yes.
numbers is like close to 70% of our
Yeah,
atoms are hydrogen
it's
atoms.
incredible. I have like the numbers all written out in my little video, but it is like 65 or 70% of the
Yeah,
atoms are hydrogen. And then you realize, how much that's floating around in the body. And it's just, yeah, people don't realize it until they get educated. And then, like you're saying, the amount of deuterium that can potentially be in the body is enormous when we look at things a certain way. And then
exactly.
and the damage that it can do. I mean, just absolutely catastrophic for our mitochondria.
Right,
Uh,
exactly. But it also is helpful in other places because so seals actually, yeah, increase the deuterium levels in their bones by a factor of 2. So they have twice as much deuterium in their bones as there is, for example, in seawater, which is kind of the standard. They
that's
actually are able to
amazing.
trap deuterium in their bones, and that makes their bones very strong. So they can go down to deep water with very high pressure and their bones don't crack.
That's a
So it's
very
really,
cool
really
point.
cool. But it's
That's a,
also a hint that maybe we also sequester deuterium in our bones, maybe not as much, but it's a place to hide it. And that got me thinking on a whole chain of thought that's fascinating about the body's management of deuterium. And in fact, you look at the metals, and many of them are essential but toxic. All of them
yes, yes,
actually. Well, not all
right.
of them. Some of them are only toxic, but the ones that are
Right.
essential are
It's the
also toxic.
quantity, right? Right. With
Well,
the,
it's
it's
how
the,
it's managed. It's how it's
Mhm.
managed. So you have like iron, Fe+2, Fe+3. There's two different versions of iron with extra proton. And there's ways to sequester the iron and convert it into the safe form, but then it can get loose and then it can it can react with hydrogen peroxide to cause all kinds of damage. So
Right.
iron is very, very carefully managed in the body. And so it gets delivered to the enzymes that need it in order to work properly. Or for example, the red blood cells that have to carry the oxygen in the heme. And so the body knows how to successfully deliver it to where it needs to go
Mhm.
and let it do its thing and then get it hidden away again. And it's the
Right.
same thing with deuterium. I think deuterium is actually useful in the bone, for example, to make it stronger, but it's deadly in the mitochondria. It ruins
Right.
the
Right.
ATPase pumps. It's like putting sugar in the gas tank. And the
Right.
body knows that, and the body has incredibly elegant ways. It's so beautiful. All of a sudden, all these, I had been, and I'm fascinated by biology, and I'm fascinated by the details in biology. And you look at certain enzymes, you'll have a situation where a molecule has to get transported across the mitochondrial membrane into the mitochondria, and the enzyme has to be in there too. And then the reaction takes place, and then the cholesterol reaction product has to get out of the mitochondria, all these steps. And like, why don't you just do it in the cytoplasm? What's the big deal here? Why do you have to do this in the mitochondria? I was so puzzled by that actually for a long time until I discovered deuterium. And then I realized that all those reactions that are done that way, what's happening in the mitochondria is important because that reaction is delivering deuterium depleted water to the mitochondria. The purpose of the reaction, I might even say, is to do that. So there's a constant process of delivering low deuterium water to the mitochondria, and in particular low deuterium protons to the mitochondrial intramembrane space, which they have to travel across those ATPase pumps to get out. And they need to be protons, not deuterons. So the body tries to put as few deuterons in there as it can through absolutely elegant, complicated processes that go on throughout the cell and outside the cell. I mean, everywhere in the body, there's a focus on this issue of keeping that deuterium out of mitochondria. I'm convinced of that. And it's suddenly all these things that looked weird to me. Why is it doing that? Why does it have to do that? I'm always asking, that's why.
It's
It
making more
answers so
sense.
many questions. It's so cool. Yeah, I love it. I'm super excited. You can tell.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Actually, so I
Yeah.
was very excited about your work on this idea of sequestering the deuterium because I had not thought of that previously. And I think one of the things I like to point out to people is that we forget that we still know so little about anything, right? So you're on the
It's so
edge,
true.
right?
It's
There's
so
still
true.
so much to discover, and so
Yeah.
you're going down this particular path right now with your current research, saying, "Wow, wait a minute, maybe there are all these different ways." Just the idea of sequestering the deuterium is very cool.
And once
And
you say that, you look for it. And then when you look for it, you
right,
find it. That's what's so
right,
cool. All of a
right,
sudden, oh,
right.
that's why this happens. So I'm just loving it. I mean, the research is phenomenal. I'm having such a good time. I love puzzles, and this is like a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Yes, very
But I'm making
interesting.
progress. I'm really making progress every day, and I discover new things almost every
Oh
day.
my
So
gosh,
it's
that's
really exciting.
amazing. I'm
Yeah,
so
and I just
glad.
got two papers accepted for publication. I'm really thrilled about this. Within a week, we have
Oh wow.
Anthony Kyriakopoulos and I have been collaborating on papers on deuterium, and we've actually got three in the works. And
Oh,
two of
nice.
them have been accepted in the last week. They're not published yet, but they got accepted. And the third one we're still waiting, but it looks hopeful as well. So we might end up with three papers on deuterium. One is on
Oh,
deuterium and taurine. One is on deuterium and mitochondria. I mean, and the gut microbes. And one is on deuterium and cancer. So there's three different angles of deuterium. And I'm so thrilled. If we can get all three of those published, it'll put deuterium on the map, I think.
oh, that's fantastic. Well, yeah, there's work. We touched upon that. You just mentioned about the bacteria, and I'm so excited about kefir, and we talked about butyrate a
Yes,
bit and the special fats.
absolutely.
So like I was so eager to actually do like a separate offline discussions or something about just the potential of kefir to
Yes,
assist with deuterium depletion. Maybe that's
absolutely.
one of its benefits. I'm sure that it must be.
Yeah,
It's like a
right. Well,
almost like a
anything
side
that's
effect.
probiotics, I think probiotics are really good. And I am so appreciating the gut microbiome. I have the book Toxic Legacy that I wrote, and the hardest chapter to write was the one on the gut. I have a third chapters on the gut and glyphosate in the gut. And I read a lot of
Mm.
papers, and I had to really think hard because there's a lot of papers on the gut microbes. I don't know if you've seen them coming out recently. They've done a lot of analyses of the distribution of the different microbes associated with different diseases, like a Parkinsonian gut microbiome or an autism gut microbiome, all these things. And they're finding this and that, this thing's elevated, this thing's suppressed. It's very, very complicated. And you kind of get
There's
stuck, you get caught in the weeds pretty quickly when you read
right.
those papers.
There's too
But
much information for me to
yeah,
try to keep up with.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. Right now, you get these papers that just have huge amounts of information, and then they're not really able to articulate exactly what they're seeing, because it's too complicated.
Right,
And so
right.
that's frustrating. But I did finally manage to get a story out of. I'm very proud of that chapter because I finally sort of worked out a story on glyphosate that I believe is correct, and wrote that in the chapter. And it's quite interesting. And then when I go back to deuterium, the story makes even more sense, about glyphosate in the gut
Oh
and how
yeah,
it
absolutely.
disrupts the deuterium homeostasis in the gut.
Right. And then that also would tie in very well with the whole GMO issue, right? Because the
I know, yeah.
GMOs are holding, they're delivering a lot more deuterium to us. The GMO foods tend to have more deuterium than your
And that's
organic.
partly, I think, because glyphosate's messing up their ability to keep it out, you know. So
Right, right.
it's really fascinating to keep it out of the things that you're going to eat, which is where you care, because you know. So as you know, animal-based fats are typically low in deuterium, and
Yes.
organic butter has less deuterium than non-organic butter.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. The whole thing. I'm very, very excited about the whole Maha movement, and because it's
Hmm.
based on this very simple idea, we have to clean things up. We need
Right. I
clean
love it.
food, right? It's this very simple principle. Like people like you will be busy for a long time trying to figure out why things are so bad, but in the meantime, the solution is kind of simple, right?
Yes, I know. That's what's really
Right?
great. It's just
Right? We got to
my
clean.
recommendation for good health is just clean living, you know.
Yes, yes.
Stay away from poisons. So eat fresh air, you know, live in a place that doesn't have a lot of toxic chemicals in the air. Eat organic food, you know, get out in the sunlight, walk the beach. I mean, just you know,
Hmm.
get exercise. Basic healthy living. I think if you just have a healthy lifestyle, a lot of your disease problems will go away
Yeah,
without the
absolutely.
drugs. Yeah, without
Right,
the need for the
right,
drugs.
right. Absolutely. I don't, outside of a trauma situation, yeah, I just don't find a need for the drugs either. And of course, the other things, that Maha will be working on is cleaning up the corruption
I
that's just
know.
missing,
It's so
right?
thrilling. I've read all,
Yeah.
I think I've read all of Robert Kennedy's books and I just love him.
Oh,
I'm a friend of him. I know him. He and I know each other from way back, actually, even before glyphosate. He and I would meet up at, we would, you know, intersect at conferences because we were both into the autism.
oh,
Uh,
very nice.
yeah,
Well,
so
sure,
I've met him.
you're actually listed in the beginning of his book. You're one of the scientists that is listed
Oh,
there.
yeah,
In the
wonderful. Yeah, he also did
dedication
a, yeah, he did a
for
nice
the book
blurb
on
for me
Fauci.
too, for my book. He had a
Oh,
little
very
blurb that,
nice.
yeah,
Very
so
nice.
I was pleased. He
Yeah.
gave me credit for helping him out with that first lawsuit because he contacted me for that lawsuit against for glyphosate and
I
non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, that first one with Dwayne Lee Johnson.
oh
And I just
wow.
basically handed him a bunch of, because I had a huge pile of papers at my fingertips, you know, on
Excellent.
glyphosate. So I gave him a lot of literature to help him tease out the
Excellent.
story,
So yeah,
and it
I've
was just
never
pro bono, you know.
oh, very nice. But I mean, it's funny, right? Because we do the work because it's our passion, right? The reward is the
Exactly.
impact, right?
Yeah, I don't need the
So
money. I'm like
right,
I'll do anything. You know, I
right at
will
this
really work hard on something that's
right.
going to help my cause. You know,
It,
without feeling bad if I'm not getting paid for it. So it's great that
right.
way, and I am getting paid for it, of course, because MIT is supporting me, which is wonderful. I've
Right.
had a terrific ride at MIT, and the company that was funding me originally to do my research, I was actually developing language games to have an English speaking person learn practice Chinese by interacting in a game situation with a computer. That was kind of what I was doing right before I switched over. And the company that was funding me was a company in Taiwan called Quanta Computers. And I just
Oh,
basically, that year, 2007, I just gave them a whole different proposal for my future work. It was a completely different project, you know, with a correlation between toxic exposures and disease, looking for the autism epidemic story. And they accepted that, and it's been ever since they've been funding me. So it's just fantastic. I have a really
wow.
good source of money that doesn't require me a lot of effort, you know, to write fancy proposals and things like that. So
Right. So you can keep your energy focused on the task at hand.
exactly, yeah, I
Which is
don't have
really
to
trying to
waste a
keep
lot of
us
time.
all, yeah, it's you're kind of trying to keep us all alive, right?
Yeah, but it's just
So
fantastic that I get, because a lot of people are doing the kind of research I do on the side because their direct job doesn't support that kind of work. So it's quite
right,
unusual to
right.
get funding to do the kind of work I do. It's really unusual, and I really appreciate Quantum Computers for supporting me all these years.
Oh, very nice. Well, I definitely appreciate that too. I mean, I understand the struggle. I'm doing 100 different things at once, trying to stay afloat, and I get
Yeah.
so excited about things, and it's like, well, wait, I really cannot put my attention here or there. I've got to try to focus. But this year, I think I'm going to be very fortunate where things are going to be all come together. So all my
Yeah, I
energy
think it's
is,
going to be easier. I mean, I think it's a good sign that I'm getting these papers published now because I've had a hard time getting my papers past peer review for a long time. And I think because
oh,
of my controversial stand on a bunch of things that people don't like, it makes it
right.
difficult.
Well, I think
So I'm
that,
hoping that
yeah, you're going to be
with the
more
changing administration,
mainstream. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
what I'm hoping. I'm really
yes,
hoping, yeah, which will be great. So because we've got
right.
plenty of papers being spun right now. We've had a backlog because of this problem of getting things published, but I'm
Oh,
hopeful.
yeah, yeah, it's very exciting. Oh, by the way, I should give a shout out to, you were mentioning Robert Kennedy, and I've never had the pleasure of meeting him, but I have had the pleasure of meeting with Mary Holland, who
Oh
runs the
yes,
CHD, and she's
she's great.
fantastic.
She's
She's
so great.
Yeah, she's really good, and I've met her several times, and recently I met her. I will actually be speaking at her event. She has also her own separate group in her area for health freedom. Really nice. So just giving a shout out to
Yeah, I
the
love her.
yeah, yeah, she's
And the
just
Charlotte's
so
Health
wonderful.
Defense, they're great. They're so great.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
I mean, like, and they're just putting stuff out all the time.
yeah.
And again, like I think, like your efforts, Mary's efforts with CHD and with her other groups, these are all going to become more mainstream
I
as we
think
move
so. This
forward,
is what
right?
makes me so excited with Kennedy getting some power. I mean, I really hope this
Yes.
goes through Senate approval and all of that, but I would be so upset. I think a lot of people would be very upset if they don't approve him.
Yeah, I am not concerned anymore. So
That's great.
from what I'm hearing from many people, this is happening. And yeah, I've been contacted from some people in the background about these different MAHA initiatives. So, and I can't really speak yet, but I'm hopefully days away from hearing some more about some initiatives that I'm involved with.
Wonderful. That's
Um,
wonderful news.
yeah, and I'll be reaching out to you again, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Please do.
And
Yeah, I'd love to do
yeah.
another interview. We obviously have a lot in common and we have a lot to say. So
Yes, there's so much, and like wow. So it's funny because the original reason was I wanted to mention about MSM, because we
mhm.
talked about there were so many different things that we ran through really quick, and now I can't even remember off the top of my head. And I had written out even an agenda for us because after that first meeting, I was like, oh wow, we got to speak about all this stuff again.
Right.
Right, and I couldn't even remember, but it was just a lot of fun as we just jumped around to these different topics.
Right.
So what? In fact, it just reminded me because I have my hand just on my hydrogen bottle
There you
because
go.
I was gonna right. So this is one of the things about helping people get healthy hydrogen.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I do is I aggressively go after bad products because there's so many products out there, bad supplements, even bad hydrogen
I
bottles.
know. It's so hard, isn't it? It's hard to sort out
Yes,
which things are good and which ones aren't.
right, right. So that's where I see my most of my effort being in the future too, is trying to continue to vet and hopefully at a bit higher level where I can have a broader impact.
Hmm.
Because if the supplement industry just becomes a copy of the pharmaceutical industry, we haven't made,
Exactly.
right? We don't
Yeah,
make
and of course,
progress.
they're in a sense they're not as regulated as the pharmaceutical industry. They go through all
Right.
these placebo-controlled style. They have this process. They get approval for the drug. That's kind of
Yep.
a seal of approval
Yep.
from the FDA and that sort of thing. And the supplements are more loosey-goosey, so they can.
Yes. It's very scary. And most of
You
them are
have to be
terrible.
careful. Yeah,
Right.
you have to be very careful.
Right. That's the landscape that I'm looking at. And so I like to choose things that are safer than most. So MSM being one of them.
Hmm.
So super cheap, super safe, so impactful, providing that vital sulfur and
And the
that's
methyl,
something.
it's two
Yeah, the
methyl
methyl group.
sulfonyl So it's got two methyls plus a
Yeah.
sulfur. It's like what's not to like about that? Because the methylation
Right.
pathways is that's one of the things that I think is delivering deuterium depleted methyl groups around the body. And then sulfur, of course, is making sulfate, which is in this like the heparin sulfate in the glycocalyx lining all the blood vessels and also in the sulfomucins in the gut. I think those sulfomucins are really, really important in the gut. They line the gut barrier, they create gelled water, just like the gelled water lining the blood
Right.
vessels. And that's the exclusion zone water. This is all Jared Pollock's work. It's so
I
fascinating. I love his
love
work.
his work too. I have a bunch
I'm
of
reading his
videos on.
third book now, which isn't even out yet, but it's also
Oh,
fast. I've read his
very
first two.
nice. Very
Yeah,
nice.
it's really cool. It's about uh, the atmosphere and the oceans and how the oceans are actually like a giant. It's so fascinating. Like the oceans are pumping protons out into the air, And I think those protons are not likely to be deuterons. So when you breathe
Right.
air over the ocean, you're actually breathing deuterium depleted water in a way, or
Right.
deuterium
Right.
protons. It's so cool,
Mhm.
the concept of blowing this up to the level of the earth as opposed to just the human body and
Right.
having the same concepts apply is just magnificent,
Yeah, because once again, that you get this free healthcare, take walks along the beach, just like the idea of forest bathing to get all those good microbes,
Yeah, I know.
which is
It's
something
really
that was
interesting.
recommended. Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
Japanese actually will recommend forest bathing. I mean, there are some wellness practitioners that will consider it. But yeah, absolutely. Like this idea, like you said, the ocean water,
Being out in nature,
wonderful.
being out in nature is so important. And city people don't really appreciate it because they don't really have the experience to do it, but and it's
Right.
hard to
Mm.
imagine it could be so good for your health, not just because it's pleasant, but because there's therapeutic value.
Right. So
Even
you're
like
right.
hanging out next to a waterfall, because people have shown that. I remember a paper that showed that, and they did a study on people and they had them hang out next to a waterfall, like for a long time, sit and read a book next to a waterfall. And they showed that it had therapeutic value. And at the time I was like, well, that's really
Fantastic.
weird. But then I realized because the water that comes off the waterfall, the energetic water that's coming down, and then the mist that's created, the mist is going to be
Mhm.
deuterium depleted because the deuterium is heavy, it stays with the liquid phase.
Right.
So anything that's sort of getting out into the air is going to be deuterium depleted. And the waves at the shore have the same phenomenon, So when you're breathing, if you've got waves in the ocean and you're walking next to it, the water that comes out is going to be deuterium depleted. I suspect it hasn't. I don't think that's been proven, but I think it's extremely likely.
It makes perfect sense, 'cause as you said, I mean, the deuterium is twice as heavy. Well, you know what? One thing I'd like to maybe clarify for the audience too, because when we're talking about deuterium depleted water, sometimes it is written as D2O, which I think is not really accurate.
No, that's
Like
the
D,
opposite.
right?
D2O is deuterium rich water,
Right, right. And then
pure deuterium water.
yeah, and so the really heavy, oh yeah, I meant to say the heavy water too. But
Yeah.
even not D2O, but I feel like the DHO is more
Uh,
accurate, meaning
DH, right. Well,
there's
yeah,
usually
you'd
going to
have
be
to.
one.
You're right, and I will say more about that because it's important. But so
Yes, so
D2O
please.
is pure deuterium water, which is very hard to get and to make. They figured out how to do it during World War II, and they needed it for the atom bomb. And then they started studying it shortly after that. So there's some really fascinating papers coming out,
Mm,
even like in the 60s, for example. I had to go all the way back to the 60s to find these papers where they exposed rats to high levels of deuterium because they could make this water that was very rich in deuterium, and they would
right.
just feed it to the rats. Apparently it doesn't taste a whole lot different from water, which is really scary because it's extremely poisonous. So these
Right.
rats that gave them this like maybe 60% D2O in the water, and you're right, HDO, a lot of HDO, that
Right.
only
Right.
one deuterium, one hydrogen. That's more common because not all the deuteriums end up on the water. These rats drank this water, and then they got really vicious and violent. They attacked each other. And then I think it was
Wow.
mice. I think they've done it with both mice and rats. I remember one study on mice where they just basically got very ferocious and very hungry. And then within a week or 10 days, all of them were dead. So they would eventually keel over and just kind of, kill me already because I'm so sick. I can't even, they
Wow.
got very, very sick and they died. So that shows you deuterium is extremely toxic at extremely unrealistic high levels, which you
Mm,
never see in nature. But, that gives you the sense of deuterium. So then when you have
right.
what we have in our water, it's not going to be D2O, probably very, very rare
Right.
D2O. It's going to be HDO. There's going to
Right.
be
Right.
H2O and HDO, and that's it, tiny
Could be
amounts of D2O.
right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. There's just going
And
to be
when the
one of those.
HDO, when it ionizes, because water splits up into H plus and OH minus, there's these ions floating around in water, and there's a certain percentage of the water molecules that are separated into H plus and OH minus. That's the pH. So pH
Right.
7 is exactly equal amounts of H plus and OH minus. As you go up, you get more OH minus. As you go down, you get more H plus. But the cool thing is that if you think about it, I'm an HDO molecule. I've got an H and a D. So which one am I going to keep behind with the O? The H or the D? Which one? And it's going to be the D because deuterium binds much more strongly to oxygen than hydrogen does. So I'm going to let go of my H plus and hang on to my D to make OD minus, right? If I'm an HDO. So
Right.
when you think about it, when you have water, pH 7, half of them are H plus, half of them are OD minus. Well, not half of them OD minus, but there are many more Ds in the OD minus than there are in the H plus crowd. So the H pluses are going to be deuterium depleted. Now you have your structured water lining all the blood vessels, lining the gut barrier. The structured water is a battery, and this is Gerald Pollack's work. He shows that it's a battery. It pushes the protons out. So it wants to be negatively charged. It builds a structure that sort of leaves out one of the protons. So it ends up pushing protons out of the structure. And those protons go out to the edge of the gel. So they're going to go out into this fluid water, say inside the gut, lumen, the fluid water. If you think about all those sulfomucins creating the gelled water, creating those protons that are free to move out, you're delivering deuterium depleted protons to the gut lumen. And that is extremely important, I think, right? The sulfomucins are doing that. And the gut lumen is where all the activity is. It's making all these nutrients, microbes are making all these nutrients like the butyrate, and they're making low deuterium butyrate, in part because of this activity of the sulfate. So if your gut microbes, if your gut can't make enough sulfomucins, then you have higher deuterium in the gut lumen, because there's fewer sulfomucins to trap the deuterium in the gel. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And it reminded me, sometimes my clients, so I think enemas can be a very useful tool for wellness in certain, for extreme cases. And MSM enemas are something that I've recommended for people and that my clients have used successfully. Because earlier you were relating the MSM to that, and it just popped into my head again about wow, yeah, right. Maybe that's another reason why the MSM, like I just thought of it at a much simpler level with the MSM, because it's so good for healing, it's so good for detox, reduces the energy needed for the cell to get things in and out, etc. But what you're speaking about here with the sulfates, I think
It can be a source of
another impact.
sulfate. Yeah. And there's also DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide, which is kind of an oxidized version of MSM. That's closer to sulfate because it's got this sulfide oxide.
You know what's interesting? I wonder if you would comment. So DMSO has always been kind of a hotter topic, especially in the alternative world.
Yeah.
And I always try to get people away from it. I'm like, listen, MSM is just it's cheaper, it's readily available, it's out there. It actually is more useful. The DSMO is a better carrier in certain cases for certain things, but I think overall MSM is far superior for people to take advantage of. So I try to actually, because I have people come to me with that sometimes, and I'm like, I just don't see the need for it. I understand the benefit, but
it's more expensive. I didn't know that. Yeah. No, they're very similar, right? Because DMSO is just oxidized as MS.
Right. Molecularly, it's almost identical.
Yeah, it's an extra oxygen.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't have an opinion, but I think MSM is more accepted in the mainstream. DMSO is sort of like, that's for animals. Don't they have a problem?
Right. It's like an alternative thing. Like I said, it's kind of hot in the alternative community. And used a lot as like this idea of as a carrier to be mixed with other things we're trying to get into the body.
But one thing I found was really, really fascinating. It was kind of a breakthrough for me. And again, it's an old paper. I found a paper from the 1960s, which was about a microbe. It was a marine microbe, but it was an enzyme they were studying, which was called hydrogenase. And that enzyme is able to take protons off of small organic molecules like glucose and formate, strip them from the molecule and make hydrogen gas. So the gut microbes do the same thing with an enzyme that's very similar to the enzyme they were studying. And they found out in that study in the 1960s that the hydrogen gas that those organisms made was 80% depleted in deuterium. It lost 80% of its deuterium. Again, that's because of this whole issue of the gas form. The deuterium stays behind in the liquid. I mean, it's all this policy of, and even like glaciers, when you have glacier melt water, that's also low in deuterium because the deuterium stays with the solid form. So it's always when you go from solid to liquid to gel to gas, each step, the deuterium stays behind. I guess it's solid, gel, liquid, gas, and each time the deuterium stays behind. So by the time you get to the gas, you're really down, very low deuterium. And so this hydrogen water, I remember way back when it was a Weston Price meeting. And a woman gave an interesting talk on hydrogen gas. She was very enthusiastic about it, as a treatment. And hydrogen water. And I was like, I don't know, that seems kind of hokey, you know. Okay, at the
It
time I
does
was
to
like, I
me.
don't understand how that can possibly, you know, it didn't make sense to me. And then it was once I discovered this whole thing about hydrogen gas being so depleted in deuterium that hydrogen water is probably providing protons that are very depleted in
Right.
deuterium.
Now,
And then that's going to be useful for the metabolism. Yeah.
it's interesting because some of these I have another bottle downstairs from the same company that comes with a canard for actually just taking up the hydrogen gas. The
Oh,
issue is,
interesting.
yeah, it is, and I think for most cases it's really not
It's
useful.
probably hard to keep it there, right? Because it's just going to go
Yeah,
out
yeah,
into the
right. So
air.
they have a thing you plug right into your nose, but you still need a
Mm.
certain amount of density to make it useful, for it to get into the blood. I don't do it, and I don't really
Yeah.
recommend it.
I
But
don't either, by
again,
the way. I do drink, this is deuterium depleted water, so I do drink. This is
what?
mixed with 10 parts per million is what I buy. So very
Okay.
tiny. And then I mix it 2/3 regular water, just a little bit. Every day I drink about a third of a glass of
Okay.
this 10 parts per million water mixed with regular water to make it sort of like glacier water. I'm imitating glacier water.
I was going to say because it's a bit expensive if we're buying
It's very expensive. It's outrageous.
it's
And I
crazy, right?
yeah, it's really, I think the price would come down if enough Americans become aware of its, I think it's beneficial. I don't take any supplements. I don't take any drugs. You know, I'm very particular. I have Epsom salt baths and
Oh, very
deuterium
nice.
depleted water and then sunlight. Those are kind of my three drugs, if you will. Of course, yeah.
Nice,
Also,
nice.
you know, a coffee, if you call that a drug, coffee and alcohol, definitely include those,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
don't, yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's yeah. That was one of the things that always concerned me was the cost because there are treatment centers for cancer.
Yeah,
Their
right.
focus is all right. It's all deuterium.
But you know, it's made in Russia. Like Americans don't even have a factory to make it. So already there's a shipping issue, right? And you're shipping water, which is really heavy.
Crazy.
And you try to make it as low as it's interesting because it's not like you want to have more, you want to have less. So it's like pure water, you know, very little
Right.
deuterium in there.
Right.
It's kind of weird, but that's why you have to sell it very, very concentrated, reverse concentrated, you know, concentrated in hydrogen, if you will, compared
Right.
to
Right.
deuterium. Yeah.
Right.
And then you mix it with regular water to make something that's more normal because you don't want to drink it up straight if it's 10 parts per million. That's not something, you know, anything. I think you don't want to have it in excess, in extreme, you know, so that drinking it up straight would be really extreme. Maybe if you have cancer, it might be a good idea, but, you
Right.
know, I would
Well,
avoid that.
that's a good point too that you make because again, like you mentioned earlier too, look, the deuterium could be serving biological functions that we're not aware of yet.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
right.
think you
So
would
like
want
it,
to actually
yeah,
reduce your deuterium so much that you actually had what I would
right.
call a deuterium deficiency, because it does, as I said, it probably makes it actually surely makes the gel stronger because the deuterium water
Right.
is thicker. It you know has higher viscosity
Right.
than hydrogen water, and so it's making the gel stronger. It may actually improve the battery. I wouldn't be surprised if it improves the
Mm.
battery, you know, and so I suspect it has benefits in gelled water, and it certainly has benefit in bone because it's been shown that it makes the bones much
Oh
stronger
yeah, for the
with these
density.
seals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how it does that, but somehow it makes the bone a lot stronger um, if there's more deuterium in it, and then seals take advantage of that, you know.
Yeah, that's
And so,
interesting.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's interesting because there's proline is one of the amino acids, and it's an unusual one. Proline. Um, there's lots of proline in collagen. You know, the 20 coding amino acids I'm talking about that make the proteins. And there's lots and lots of proline in collagen. And in general, the proteins that go into the structural proteins that go outside the cells and hold your body together, they tend to have a lot more proline on average than the enzymes and things like that are inside the cells, the transporters. They have less proline. In other words, proline is highly represented external to the cell and in the structural molecules that hold your body together, like collagen. Collagen is a very good example. It's
Right.
lots of proline, and it's most common by far protein in the body. And of course, it's the skin, it's everything, the glue, you know,
Skin,
the joints,
hair,
the skin, the
right,
bones, the
nails.
hair. Yeah, they all have a lot of collagen. And collagen has a lot of proline. And proline actually has a super interesting property, which again I learned about from an old paper. So
Oh,
these old papers are really great because people aren't studying these things anymore, you know. But there was an old paper that showed that proline traps deuterium. There's the carbon that hangs out. It's called the C2 carbon of proline is in this ring. Proline has it actually the tail. You know, you have the head of the protein that has the carbon dioxide and the ammonium. The proteins hooked together. You know, I'm getting into too much technical stuff
Well,
here, but
is it related to the triple helix of collagen?
yes, I think so. I think that proline
Oh,
is part of what makes the triple helix work
that's
properly.
how that's.
Glycine is the other one. Collagen has tons of glycine, which worries me because glyphosate substitutes for glycine. And I think collagen is getting messed up by glyphosate substitution for the glycine in the collagen molecule to mess up the triple helix. But the proline probably also is extremely important to form that beautiful triple helix structure, which gives it all its properties. It has a lot of nice properties for building the structural components of your body.
Mm.
But the proline is able to. This experiment was so cool. They basically exposed the proline to high deuterium water. You know, back when they were able to get this high deuterium water, they played around with different experiments to see what happens. And they put the proline in high deuterium water, and the proline picked up water specifically on that carbon atom. So it was like 17% deuterium, 17% deuterium in the proline, which is exactly one carbon atom, and it's that carbon atom C2 that grabbed onto the deuterium. And then when they tried to get it off, like they put it in hydrochloric acid. I mean, they did everything you could think of to get the deuterium to swap out for a proton that's in the medium, you know, to just let it ditch the deuterium, and it wouldn't ditch it. It held on to it. It just held on so severely that it wouldn't let go. And so that becomes extremely interesting, because this means that if you can set up a situation where proline can trap deuterium in the medium somewhere, it won't let go. And so that's a way to get the deuterium to get sequestered in the bone, in that C2 of that proline. I think that's how it works. I think that's how the bone ends up with so much deuterium, is because that
It's through the
C2
proline.
won't let go. It's really important, because like the oxygen will swap out its hydrogen for deuterium all the time. If you've got an oxygen atom on some kind of molecule, and it's got an H there or a D, and it'll just let it go
doesn't
and pick up
care.
another one. It constantly picks up another one. It doesn't hold on to one particular one. You know, it's always sharing with the medium, mixing it up. Whereas this carbon is unique because it doesn't mix it up. Once it gets it, it hangs on to it for dear life. It's such a great property, and I think biology uses that property in order to get rid of the deuterium and keep it sequestered in the bone.
And you're investigating the different fats that have this carbon atom, right? For sequestering. We
It's
spoke
so
about that last,
fascinating.
right?
Oh, that is just amazing. I'm writing a paper right now. We're working, again, Anthony and I, we've got a third person on our team now, but we're working on another paper which goes into all of that. It's so interesting because I'm finding a small set of classes of molecules that have carbon. And that carbon atom is situated in such a way that it can trap deuterium and not let go. And proline is a really great example of that. But now I'm finding a bunch of others. You know, histidine is another one. It's typically in a ring and with some nitrogens in the ring, or it could be in a string, like in these fatty acids. You know, you have these polyunsaturated fatty acids, like EPA and DHA. You know, those are very useful in the brain. They're high concentration in the brain. People take, fish oil as supplements and things like that to try to enrich. They're highly unsaturated fats, and unsaturated means you've got the double bonds in there, right? C double bond C. And so there's a particular kind of carbon called a bis-allylic carbon. This is very deep in chemistry. A bis-allylic carbon. Bis meaning two allylic, and so the allylic is the double bond. So basically, you have a carbon atom, and it's got a carbon to the left and a carbon to the right that's holding on to, and then those two carbons are holding on to another carbon outside on the chain with a double bond. So it's C double bond C, single bond C, single bond C, double bond C. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but the carbon in the middle, who's got those two double bonded carbons on either side, that's one of those special carbons that can trap deuterium.
You know what I'll probably do? When I go to publish this, I'll put a graphic up maybe for people, because I have some graphics. I have some similar graphics in some of my videos when I talk about mitochondria and deuterium. I show these chains of fatty acids.
That would be so perfect.
Right. Yeah. So I'll do that to try to illustrate exactly what you're talking about.
Because you can see it easily in EPA, because it has that double bond, single bond, double bond, single bond, double bond. So it's and all those carbons. And so the really cool thing was I found an article. I'm having such a fun time, you can tell, because I find these articles, they're pretty obscure often, but they're wonderful because they're so revealing, And so I've got one I call it C10. So C10 is the 10th carbon in arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is one of these, actually Mercola hates it, like he thinks it's really toxic, arachidonic acid. That's one of the common. You have linoleic acid, and then it grows, chain length grows to make arachidonic acid. And Mercola thinks they're extremely toxic and you shouldn't be eating them. You should avoid them. And Dr.
Mm.
Mercola, you know
Yeah.
Dr. Mercola, right? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I think everybody knows
So,
Dr. McCauley. Yeah.
yeah. And so, but arachidonic acid actually has 3 of these bisallylic carbons in it because it has a lot of double bonds. 3 of them. And EPA and DHA have even more, like 5 and 6, I think. But arachidonic has 3 at 7, 10, and 13. And there was this wonderful, wonderful paper which was deuterated. So they knew those 3 were going to be important. So they had all these different
Wow.
combinations of the molecule with deuteriums in different places. Like you could put 2 deuteriums on the 7, or put 2 on the 10, or put 2 on the 13, or maybe put 2 on 2 of them, so 4, or maybe do all 6. They had all these different combinations of molecules that they played with. And they discovered something really spectacular, which is that C10, it's the middle carbon of that arachidonic acid. When it picks up deuterium, like we put 2 deuteriums on C10, then there's a reaction that is causing all these troubles in the membrane. So it's called lipoxygenase, or even just reactive oxygen. Fats get oxidized, and that's a big problem because there's a cascade reaction. There's a chemical chain that takes place, chain reaction, that one lipid takes down, the next one takes, like a domino effect,
Uh-huh.
and all the lipids in the membrane are getting messed up by the reactive oxygen. And this is with inflammation. If you get like a situation where you have some kind of inflammatory response, like rheumatoid arthritis, all these things that people have with inflammation. The inflammation causes these fats to modify themselves by picking up the oxygen. And there's a lipoxygenase, which is an enzyme that is very upregulated in inflammation. So the lipoxygenase is busy making a mess out of these lipids that are in the membrane. But what happens is that if you throw deuterium on C10 in those lipids, it not only doesn't react, but it actually stops the chain reaction. It stops it. And so this makes me think that the whole purpose of the inflammation is to trap deuterium. This is sort of a wild theory that I'm playing with. We're writing this up in this article, but it's really, really cool.
Wow.
So they're thinking, well, let's just feed somebody deuterium rich lipids. They're actually proposing, that you'd have a supplement that would be fatty acids that are loaded up with deuterium at those places in order to protect the membrane from oxidative damage. But the problem is that the whole point of it is to trap deuterium. If you've already got the deuterium, you can't trap it. So those aren't going to work to solve the problem of soaking up the deuterium that's in the medium. They're not going to work because they already have it. So I don't think that's going to be a good idea.
That is interesting, though. Let me differentiate something just again for the audience, people that are watching, because what you're speaking about are the fats and lipids that are part of us,
Yes.
right? There's also the other thing that's very important is the fat that we burn for fuel.
Yes.
Right,
Absolutely.
that we take in. And so just so people understand what you were talking about at this moment is how the deuterium is useful as being part of who we are, right? And can actually end up protecting against inflammation. For example,
exactly. If you have enough deuterium doping in the membrane, then it'll slow down the inflammatory response.
Right.
And in fact, the whole thing,
Very cool.
and so the article even talked about that once you have enough deuterium, it shuts down these enzymes, and then other enzymes take over because these enzymes are blocked because they have a very sensitive reaction to deuterium. Once deuterium is there, the enzyme doesn't work anymore. The ones that are making all this trouble. But then what happens is another enzyme takes over, and it produces a product that's actually helps to resolve the inflammation. So they're called resolvins, in fact, resolvins. So they proposed in this article that that the deuterium would cause it to shift over to making resolvins instead of making these reactive, signaling molecules that are causing trouble. And then that would resolve the inflammation and finish the story. I mean, basically, you get some kind of injury, you get an inflammatory response, the lipids get messed up, the deuterium gets trapped, and the deuterium gets trapped is the part that nobody knows about, but I'm proposing that it's a hypothesis,
That's, I mean, I notice I keep saying this is interesting and this is interesting because you introduce a lot of things that I haven't come across before.
Right.
Like just the idea with the seals is just like so, because I love animals and stuff, so it's just so fascinating. And just all of this, I find it's so great because even from my very limited understanding and perspective, going on for years already, I was like, wow, man, like deuterium, this idea for us to be aware of it, it is like so important, you
Yeah, it's
know?
amazing that it hasn't been touched. I mean, I think the mainstream is practically completely clueless. And I have to
Right,
say that it's a popular topic in Russia, in China. The papers are coming out
right.
from Russia, from China, and even Ukraine and Hungary. I
Hmm.
mean, all these Eastern European, um, sort of the other side, right? The
Right,
people who aren't
right,
Europe and America,
right, right,
they're very
exactly.
aware of it and they're very interested in it and they're studying it. But here, there's some people that are pushing deuterium depleted water to treat cancer. I think that's catching on.
Yes, I came
Yeah.
across that. I can't remember how many years ago, but because there's a center that's almost exclusively doing that as a cancer treatment. Again, it's kind of at this current time, it's it's cost prohibitive. The
I
price
know
of
it's too bad. I mean, of course, the cancer drugs are also very expensive. So
well, that's a very good way to put it into perspective, though, right? And
yeah,
of course,
but compared to them, it might actually be cheap.
yeah, I think you're
Compared to
correct.
water, it feels ridiculous
Yeah,
compared to water because it's so
right,
expensive.
right.
But if you
Oh,
compare it to the cancer drugs, it might not look so bad.
right. Yeah, and then we can
And also, I
really,
think the price will go down. I think once we get enough interest here that
yes.
somebody builds a factory in the US, and I imagine there will be ways to figure out how to reduce the cost. These things always get cheaper once they become more popular, right?
Yes,
I'm hoping.
absolutely.
I'm hoping the price will
Absolutely.
come way down in time.
I think
Once there's
so.
enough demand and then enough interest to somebody to build a factory, and then
Right.
you
Or
know
brand new method, and of
exactly,
course,
yes,
and we have these ways to actually contribute, the things you've already been speaking about, whether we tap more into hydrogen water and just freezing,
right.
like, and then just drinking the runoff from ice cubes,
Yeah.
literally, right? You're
Yeah, I
making,
know that could be just sort of sucking on the
right?
ice cube and then throwing the rest of the way.
There you go.
Right.
There you go. So,
Yeah.
but all these little things add up. So I think we have a lot to look forward to. Just the idea that I think a lot of things that you and others are working on, it's not going to be as suppressed anymore. We're going to be
I
going
hope so. I'm
mainstream.
going to work hard this year. That's sort of my big focus. And I almost don't deny people the right to interview me if they're not going to talk about deuterium. So you've done a great job. I really appreciate.
Oh,
I talked
thank you
about
very much.
things today that I haven't talked about before
Oh,
because this is my new
fantastic.
research. Yeah, brand new. So,
No, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I am excited. Yeah, I tried not to go off on a tangent with kefir or kefir.
yes.
But I think that I'm gonna look for some more ties to the deuterium on that because I think that is one of just another mechanism
Yeah.
why it's so powerful.
Well, and lactate, which is produced in these fermentation processes, lactate is a low deuterium nutrient. So the
Oh, that's
microbes
interesting.
make a low deuterium nutrient that's healthy, lactate.
Very interesting. Yeah, and of course kefir does that along with the butyrate. So we just
Butyrate
get
is
multiple.
also a low deuterium
Yeah,
nutrient,
yeah.
very much so, because the butyrate actually comes from acetate, which comes from acetogenic bacteria, which use that hydrogen gas to reduce carbon dioxide to acetate. So that's going to be very low deuterium,
Mm.
butyrate. And that's why butter is low in deuterium because it has a lot of butyrate.
Oh, very nice.
Part of why, yeah.
Another reason to enjoy butter.
I love butter and
It is.
it's a
It
healthy
is.
food.
It is
Yeah. So
so
it's
good.
great because it justifies the things you like to eat.
Yeah, yeah,
So
right, exactly.
fermented foods, animal-based fats, those are really good nutritional things to eat.
Yeah, yeah. It's very interesting because again, I'll be over time, I'll be trying to tap into some of your work to again justifying the good foods and also being stricter against, the things that are not so good. We got to get cleaner, more natural stuff. Stay away
Yes.
from the GMOs, stay away
I
from the
really
glyphosate.
appreciate you looking at the supplements because we really need awareness of which ones are good and which ones aren't.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure to do so. And thank you for all the work
This
you're
was
doing.
great.
Yeah, it really
Wonderful.
was a pleasure for me too. And yeah, we'll speak again soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Deal.
Awesome. Fantastic.
And Happy
Fantastic.
New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year to you and to everyone watching us.
Yeah.
And yeah, let me stop this recording.